Credit cards hacked, websites affected. In a new front to the decades-long conflict, cyber attacks are taking place between Israeli and Saudi hackers. But are these hackers acting on their own initiative? And is the web the new battlefield between Israel and the Arabs? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abu Gheda. Well, a hacker claiming to be from Saudi Arabia has paralyzed the websites of the Israeli stock exchange and the national carrier. Now, this cyber offensive was the latest one in a series of attacks over the past 2 weeks, which also saw the credit card details of thousands of Israeli citizens leaked online. In response, an Israeli hacker he stole 85,000 Facebook logins from Arab users, as well as thousands of credit card details of residents in the Gulf. Cal Perry reports on the cyber war.
Every trading morning, Caleb Ben David from Bloomberg News checks the morning stocks from his office in Jerusalem. To the general public on Monday morning, it looked like the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange had crashed completely.
None of the proprietary information that the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has was hacked into. The only thing that was hacked into was the sort of public website, which was just briefly hacked into.
The website of Israel's national airline carrier was also shut down. And while the damage may have been only cosmetic, Hamas immediately jumped on board with the broader political issue for all Palestinians.
We in Hamas praise the successes Arab hackers have achieved in targeting a number of Israeli sites and the harm they have caused to the interest of Israeli occupation.
It's almost impossible to verify who carried out the latest attack, but someone named Ox Omar, reportedly from Saudi Arabia, claimed responsibility for several cyber attacks over the past few weeks. Dozens of political, quote, thank yous have been pouring in across Twitter since the first hacking. The attacks on Monday could have been far worse.
A more serious incident was the attack that we had earlier on Israeli credit card accounts, because in that case, this hacker did manage to access into private information and penetrate into some of the sites.
That attack led to an ominous warning from the Israeli government.
Whoever harms Israel or is planning to harm Israel, trying to harm Israel, including in cyberspace, will be harmed. That is to say, they will not be immune from Israeli retaliatory action.
For Israelis, the hacking and shutting down of websites is one thing, but it's the accessing of personal financial information that scares people here the most. As far as the Israeli government is concerned, the hackers have been warned. Cal Perry, Al Jazeera, Jerusalem.
All right, so is the web the new battlefield between Israel and its neighbors? Let's discuss this and bring in our guests. In London, we're joined by Nikki Moore. She's a technology writer and expert on internet security. And also in London is Dave Clemente, who's a researcher with International Security Program at Chatham House. And over in Cairo, Abdullah Schleifer. He's a professor of journalism and senior fellow Center for Journalism at the American University in Cairo. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Abdullah Schleifer over in Cairo. I'll ask you the question that I posed at the top there. Is the web the new battleground between Israel and the Arabs, or should we just not read into this and see it perhaps just as it is, as credit card hacking and website paralysis?
Well, it appears to be a battlefield. I mean, we used to talk about citizen journalism, so now I guess we can talk about citizen cyber warriors. The only thing is, we don't necessarily say that it's Arab-Israeli, because according to an Israeli an analyst who's been tracking this, a lot of the servers that were involved in the attacks were not in the Arab world. They were coming from different places in Europe, as well as one server in Gaza and elsewhere. And furthermore, the hacker who's received the most prominence said he's from Riyadh, but there was no sign that it was a Riyadh server. What it really resembles, and so it's definitely a cyber war, and it involves Israel, but it's not necessarily just the Arabs. It could be sort of like anonymous. the group of activists that sprung up on the side of Julian Assange and started hacking into American companies that were closing down credit facilities for WikiLeaks. And they came from everywhere, Europe, America, the Arab world. Certainly, it's logical that Arabs will be involved in this, and probably more so now than ever because of the publicity, the fact that it's going on. It's a new front. And you know, the very fact that on one hand, military action has gotten nowhere or has been very counterproductive on the part of the Palestinians or the Arabs over the last 30, 40 years with Israel. And on the other hand, the peace process is not going anywhere. One could imagine that for people who are very frustrated with the standoff, people on the Palestinian or broader Arab or Muslim or even European left-wing sympathizers, the idea of cyber warfare becomes very attractive.
All right,
and
let's put that to Dave Clemente, Abdullah, for a moment. Dave, just give us your impression on whether you think this is just simply a cyber attack, or whether there's something much deeper going on here targeting Israel.
I think there's something much more here, perhaps even broader than the situation in the Middle East between Arabs and Israelis in cyberspace at the moment. I think what we're talking about here is perhaps not, it's just a wider arena for conflict, for protest, and for activism. And sometimes it's difficult to know exactly which one of those we're seeing when we see these news stories. So, you know, to take a very broad opening view of this, cyberspace gives protesters the ability to operate anonymously in cyberspace, but it also, you know, for better or worse, for activism, for hacking, you know, we may perceive it as good, some of it as good, others as bad. Cyberspace gives us the anonymity to pursue these aims, and it's almost impossible to know exactly who we're dealing with in many of these occasions.
Well, let's just put that to Nikki. Nikki, give us your view as a technology expert, whether you think that this is classified as cyber warfare. Is it a cyber attack? Is it espionage at this point? And what is the difference between all of those?
I think this is a real worry, and I think from my point of view this is, you know, cyber warfare. There's obviously been political unrest in these countries for, you know, ongoing for a while now, and I think this is a natural extension of the next step. You know, things haven't really progressed that much in the real world, and now people have got they're empowered to go onto the internet and take these things, you know, globally, launch attacks. So it's not just a case of, you know, Facebook passwords, email address, credit card details, which is obviously very dangerous. They can use it as a political tool to get their message across, and they're exchanging digital blows across the net. So I think this is a real worry. And whether or not this can be classed as maybe cyber terrorism, it's something that I think the governments really need to take note about, and not just look at as a case of, you know, leaked passwords and things like that. It's something it's the next step. It's the natural progression. People are using the internet, they're using the web to fight this war.
We'll talk about government responses a little later on, Nikki, because it is a very interesting point that I'd like to bring up with all of you. But Hamas, at the same time, who has no claim to this, we must add, has described these cyber attacks as a resistance against Israel, and Hamas has, quote, urged Arab youth to activate and develop it. My question to you, Nikki, is how easy or difficult is it for Arab youth to activate and develop this? I mean, do you simply need to have the intellectual as well as the technological know-how to expand this?
Well, obviously you need to be very technical in order to implement this, because hacking is you know, it's a very specialised thing to do, and it's not just an everyday person that could get into it and do it. These people are very intelligent, they're very technical, they're very, you know, tech savvy in how to get into computer systems, into network infrastructures, and you know, there are a lot of the younger generation who are very kind of internet savvy, are aware of all these things that they can do, and it's a way of the younger generation making their mark and launching attacks.
Abdullah, in Cairo, meanwhile, Israeli officials have said that they will respond the same way to the hacker attacks as they would a terrorist attack, in fact. How serious, in your opinion, could this get?
Well, that's the question. What do they mean? Do they mean respond in kind? Certainly, Israel is the most advanced as far as the technology of internet and web communications, Israel is, is a very advanced country. In fact, there may even be a certain poetic justice to this, because one of the most startling uses of internet, of computer penetration, we don't know if it was by internet, but computer penetration happened with an action taken against Iran, and it's generally attributed to Israeli intelligence, which was planting a virus into the Iranian nuclear enrichment program.
That's right.
Sumacs. And it was devastating. It set the program back maybe by a year or two. If one were tracing the history of cyber warfare in the Middle East, one can say it started with the Israelis. And this is something a bit of a blowback. Although I don't think people had Sumacs in mind. I think people were inspired by the operations of Anonymous, which did similar things to punish American corporations that were, in their mind, punishing WikiLeaks for, and by the way, if we're talking about espionage, that was an example of espionage, when you had an American soldier turning over data, State Department data, Pentagon data, to Julian Assange.
Okay, having said all that, Abdullah, I apologize for interrupting, but do you foresee a time when a government actually responds physically to cyber warfare?
That was the question I sort of posed in the beginning of my response, which is, we don't know how they're going to respond. Obviously, they on a technical, logical level, and there were reports that the Saudi stock exchange got hit in some sort of reprisal, whether by private hackers, encouraged by the government or the government itself. Would they take it a step further? Would, for instance, if the hacking gets very serious, certainly the Israelis have been capable of, as we know from the death of nuclear scientists and other cases where they believe that their security is threatened, they've been capable of taking physical actions and attacks. So that's something we can't predict. We just have to watch. But it's not out of the realm of the impossible, because the Israelis are very quick to respond on any number of levels when they feel they're threatened.
Dave, let's just stick with this particular incident for a moment, and let me get your thoughts on whether you think Israelis, or actually I'll ask you about any other government around the world, could they respond physically to the threat of cyber warfare and cyber attacks?
Well, I think they could respond. Whether they actually get the right target or not is a completely different possibility.
Okay, do you foresee a time when a government will actually respond?
Yes, I do. In this sort of circumstance, it's easy for the language to become increasingly heightened, for the rhetoric to continually notch up higher and higher. There's very few mechanisms in this space to actually reduce tensions. And so it's easy to it's easy to imagine a point at which a government would take physical action against a cyber threat. The other question beyond that is, would they actually get the right target? We're talking about servers around the world launching attacks. Those servers are usually operated by people on a different country and on a completely different continent. So actually finding the right target is an almost impossible task, which is great if you're a protester trying to oppose your government and you want to remain anonymous. It's also great if you're a hacker trying to launch attacks. So this is the double-sided nature of the internet.
Let's bring in Nikki then too. All right, no. Dave, you raised very good points. Nikki, just respond to that. How difficult or easy is it for governments to actually find the right targets, as Dave is saying?
I think Dave is absolutely right. I mean, there's so much anonymity that's surrounding this that people can actually launch these attacks and be, unknown, untraceable. So it's very, very difficult if you want to then counteract with a physical response to know that you're going to get the right target. But I think a lot of this hinges in terms of people responding and counterattacking. It hinges on what is the definition of cyber terrorism in itself. I mean, there's a very broad definition about disrupting networks, infrastructures, bringing down computers, leaking people's personal data. But it's how in order to know how to respond in the right way, you need to have a tangible definition of what's actually happened, say, in terms of cyber terrorism. And it's very, very tricky to know how to respond in the best way.
How murky is the world of cyber terrorism, Nikki?
Well, I mean, there are very loose definitions as to what it is, and like I just said earlier, it's it's disrupting infrastructures, networks, computing systems, all that kind of stuff. So it's quite a grey area because in terms of terrorism, it's relatively new. I mean, it's a new way of people attacking each other in cyberspace. So it is quite a grey area. But I think in order for a government particularly to know how to respond to an attack like this, there has to be clear-cut definitions and ideas as to what it is that the people have actually done, so they can respond in the right way. But like Dave said, I entirely agree. It's who to target, because very often you can't find these people, you can't get the exact person, so you can't be sure that you're targeting the correct person.
Do you think in this case, and I'll come to you, Abdullah and Dave, in just a moment, but Nikki, do you think in this case the Saudis or the Israelis know exactly who is behind the credit card hacking and the paralysis of the websites?
Well, I mean, if you're online, that people come forward, and there are various names that have been thrown into the mix. So you've got, the ID F team. You've got a hacker called Hannibal who's come forward and said he's prepared to launch attacks. So there are various names and various people who do say it's them that have done it, because I think as well it's almost like a propaganda, like a power tool, that they're putting their name into the arena to say, look, you do this to us and we'll do it back. And there's a certain amount of kudos, I think, amongst the hackers for them to say, look, I leaked 30,000 Facebook, passwords. I've got, millions of people's credit card details. So, I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation to know how to manage.
All right. Abdullah, in certain countries like China and Russia, for example, some of the hacking that's come out of there, the hackers have been accused rather of being proxies for their government. Is this what we're seeing in this particular case? Do you think the hackers were acting on behalf of either the Arab government or the Israeli government, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I frankly don't think that the hacking that's come from the Arab side, hacking into Israel, has been government-sponsored. I think there's too much sensitivity into the Arab world about the capacity of Israel to respond to anything going on in the Arab world that they perceive as a threat. And I think also all Arab countries must certainly know how the technology available to the Israelis in this field is much, much greater than anything that's available in the Arab world. If you're getting into very sophisticated technology, I'm not talking about a hacker who's able to break in. Now, I'll tell you, there's something we haven't even considered, which is, ironically, there's an internal danger for Israel. Israel has a conscript army, and a conscript army means it's not like either a professional force or a necessarily politically dedicated force. You have people serving in the Israeli army who are, in some cases, may even be critical of Israeli policies in the West Bank. We know that as a fact. There are Israeli soldiers who refuse to serve. And they themselves have access, as that American soldier who released all the American materials for WikiLeaks. The Israeli conscripts have access to a lot of material. Some of it is already happening, where Israeli soldiers conscripts have posted material on social networks which could be picked up, which are politically embarrassing to the Israeli army. And it could get deeper than that. So that's another aspect which you're not going to find in the Arab world.
Right. So do you think this particular incident, this hacking incident, was perhaps a dry run for something bigger? Whether, I know you don't share the view that this was done by someone from Saudi Arabia reportedly, but whoever it was done by, I just want to know whether you think this could be a dry run for something much bigger and much greater to come.
Well, I think it's very possible that through the internet, groups have already sprung up. As I said, there's, some people say that the group is called Nightmare, if I recall correctly. In other words, it seems to be a clone of the group called Anonymous. And certainly, if that spreads in a viral manner, you could get a much more, continued attacks coming from this group. How threatening they will be, I certainly couldn't estimate that. I think the people on the technical side of this discussion could.
What about the preparation? Okay, Dave, if I can come over to you, what about the preparation, in your opinion, of Israel as well as Arab governments to thwart off or avoid cyber attacks and warfare? How prepared are they?
I think I would agree with Abdullah in that the Israeli government has put more resources into this historically. They have more capability, they have more technological skill as a government than most of their Arab neighbors. But I think a lot of the incidents we're seeing right now are not necessarily driven by governments. There's very little barrier if I'm sitting in Saudi Arabia or one of the Emirates or really anywhere around the world. As a private citizen, there's almost no barrier to me launching these attacks against another country and then claiming to be from a completely different country. So in some ways, governments don't actually need to take action in this space. When we see these kind of fairly low-grade incidents against banks or even against a stock exchange, they don't need to be the ones launching their attacks. Their citizens may be very happy to do it on their own. This in some ways gives a government deniability, and it oftentimes plays into their overall political agenda. So sometimes the government doesn't need to be involved. But I think it's useful to, I think as Nikki said, try and use proportionate language or try and figure out what definitions we want to use.
Nikki, do you agree with what Dave is saying, or do you think that there should be perhaps a more coordinated international response to cyber hacking and cyber warfare?
Yeah, I think there should be a more coordinated response, definitely. I think governments need to take note of this because I think it's a potentially very serious, next level of attacking that can cause a huge amount of damage, socially and economically. And I think, there might be one-off instances with hackers from different countries, doing small cyber attacks. But I think governments need to have a coordinated effort, a coordinated approach, because this potentially could be something quite huge.
And what will it take for the governments to come up with such a coordinated response?
Well, I mean, very often in situations like this, it always takes something incredibly bad to happen for them to then, look back and go, okay, this happened, now we need to have these things in place. But I think in this instance, with technology, they need to be more proactive because it's so accessible to people to do it, anonymously, from any part of the globe, that they need to be proactive in their measures in stopping this, implementing controls or having measures in place that can, if this happens in the future, that they know how to handle it and to handle it in the best way possible.
Abdullah, what do you think of the government's response so far, and what will it take for governments to come up with a stronger response, perhaps more coordinated, as Nikki and Dave are saying? I mean, is it going to take a loss of life, for example? Is it going to take a cyber attack that hits economies really hard?
So far, there's really not been any official reaction from the Arab world, or that would be, let's say, from Saudi Arabia, which their stock exchange was interrupted briefly. The Israelis have been very outspoken, saying that they're not going to tolerate this. Now, the question is, can countries, as for instance, it's believed, you alluded to this yourself a few minutes ago, that in China, for instance, it's generally assumed that the hackers who have been breaking into high-level security systems in the United States were private Chinese hackers encouraged by the government, or that there's a sort of systematic organization, a sort of black operation, which is government-sponsored. Now, if that's the case, can we imagine China and the United States cooperating? Can we imagine Arab countries and Israel cooperating? Well, that might be possible, because the Arabs would feel very vulnerable. And the Israelis, although they have overwhelming technical superiority, could also feel vulnerable, because the more wired in a society is, the more, for instance, it hasn't happened yet, and we hope it never does, but someday somebody could hack into hospitals and disrupt the whole internet communication system, which could be life-threatening.
Dave, all right, Abdullah, I apologize to cut you off, but my last question, I'll just address it to Dave. And Dave, if you can just give me a 30-second answer or so, because we're talking about the threat of cyber security, but at the same time, and I think this is an important point to raise, there is a private sector now that is growing as a result of cybersecurity threats, and they're trying to tap into money that governments have set aside to combat cybersecurity. So how do you assess the real threat of cybersecurity?
Well, I think as more people come online every year, tens of millions, the opportunities and the threats will increase. Many of the organizations we've been talking about here today, the ones that are suffering these attacks, are actually private sector. They're privately owned. Financial sector, energy or transport, most of these are private. These are companies which will, over time, invest more in cybersecurity. The NASDAQ in the US has estimated they spend $1 billion per year on cybersecurity, but then they have trillions flowing through their system every day. So I think we'll see an increase in public and private sector spending on cybersecurity as these dangers increase.
All right. Thank you very much to all my guests. Abdullah Schleifer in Cairo, Nikki Moore over in London, and Dave Clemente as well in London. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And of course, we thank our viewers for watching. You can always send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.